Part 1. The Hook and the Dead Wind. I am alive. I honestly cannot believe it, but I am breathing. My throat is burning like I just swallowed a handful of crushed glass and battery acid. Every single breath I take tastes like old rust, copper wire, and stagnant, dead water. My hands are shaking so violently right now that I can barely hold my thumb down on this transmitter button. I had to wrap my fingers in torn medical tape just to get a grip on the radio. But I have to broadcast this. I have to put this out into the ether. If anyone is out there listening to this frequency, if you are sitting by a campfire anywhere near the northern swamps of Zalesye, or hiding out in the rusted shells of the old pumping station, I need you to look out the window right now. Look out into the dark. Do you see a thick, unnatural white haze rolling in over the reeds? If you do, turn back. Put the fire out immediately. Do not try to walk through it. Do not think your gas mask will save you. Find a concrete hole, a basement, an old military drop box. Get inside, seal every single crack in the walls with whatever you have, lock the heavy steel doors, and pray to whatever God you still believe in. The mist is here. And it is not empty. I am sitting on the floor of my emergency drop box. There are 2 meters of solid, reinforced Soviet concrete above my head, and a heavy, lead-lined steel door sitting tightly between me and the outside world. I threw the deadbolt so hard I think I fractured my wrist. And yet, I can still hear it. It is out there, right now, as I speak to you. It is sliding its massive weight against the outside of the metal door. It sounds wet, heavy, relentless, like dragging a bloated corpse across gravel. And sitting right here on my ripped backpack, trembling just as violently as I am, is that black stray cat I picked up near the Red Forest a few weeks ago. I call him Isotope. He is frantically licking his mud-caked paws, his eyes wide and completely blown out with terror. Let me tell you something, he did not try to save me out there. He did not make some heroic stand against the nightmare hiding in the fog. He is not a guardian spirit. He just ran for his life like a terrified, cornered rat. But if it weren't for his blind, animal panic, his pure instinct to survive at any cost, my bones would be dissolving in that white sludge out on the swamps right now. It all started so normally. Dangerously normal. I only went out to check a dead drop hidden beneath the rusted pipes of the old water pumping station. It was supposed to be a quick, routine run just before dusk. I needed to grab a stash of antirad medication, some clean bandages, and a few military rations I left there last month. I packed light. Just my rifle, a half-empty magazine, my dosimeter, and the cat trailing a few meters behind me, hoping for a scrap of food. My PDA showed absolutely clear skies. The atmospheric pressure was stable. There were no warnings of impending emissions, no whispers of PSY storms on the stalker network. The zone was quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I was foolish enough to enjoy the peace. Through my binoculars, I even tracked the signals of 3 veteran stalkers walking on a parallel vector, maybe 300 or 400 meters out toward the deep swamp. I could see the faint orange glow of their cigarettes in the gathering twilight. They were relaxed, their weapons slung over their shoulders, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear. It was just a standard, quiet evening in the Chornobyl Exclusion Zone. Until the wind simply died. It didn't fade away gradually. It just stopped, instantly, like someone threw a massive switch and turned off the atmosphere. The tall, dry reeds around me stopped rustling mid-sway. The air instantly grew impossibly heavy, pressing against my eardrums until they popped. And then came the smell. It hit the back of my throat before I could even pull my respirator up over my face. It smelled like profound sickness. A thick, revolting mixture of rotting swamp algae, harsh ozone, and the sweet, copper stench of raw, butchered meat left out in the sun. My stomach lurched violently. I dropped to one knee, gagging, grabbing my chest because it felt like the oxygen had been sucked right out of the air. I looked up toward the lowlands, right off the edge of the stagnant water, and I saw it. The fog started rolling in. But it was not our usual, thin radiation haze that clings to the ground in the mornings. It was impossibly thick. Like spoiled milk. Like a physical, suffocating blanket of white blindness. It didn't crawl on the ground, it moved forward as a solid, towering wall, easily 30 feet high. I watched in absolute horror as it swallowed the dead, black trees on the edge of the swamp one by one. They didn't just fade from view, they were erased. I unclipped my flashlight and clicked it on, pointing the beam directly at the approaching wall. The light didn't penetrate it. The beam just hit the white mass and bounced right back into my eyes, blinding me. The fog rolled over my boots, freezing cold, soaking straight through the leather. In less than a minute, the entire swamp vanished. I could not see the rusted pipes. I could not see the sky. I held my hand right in front of my face, inches from my nose, and I could not see my own fingers. And then came the silence. Absolute, dead, suffocating silence. The frogs had stopped croaking. The distant howling of blind dogs was gone. Even the quiet, comforting crackle of my dosimeter, the sound that tells every stalker they are still alive, just choked, sparked once, and died completely. I was completely blind, entirely deaf to the zone, and utterly alone in the milk. Part 2, the screams in the milk. I stood there, absolutely paralyzed, pressing my back hard against the rotting, crumbling trunk of some dead tree. I desperately hoped the damp would hide my heat signature or my scent at least a little bit. The fog was so thick, so physically tangible, that I couldn't even see the black metal of my own rifle that I was frantically clutching in my hands. But this absolute, blinding whiteness all around me was far from the worst part. The worst part was that, having lost my sight, my brain started to maniacally focus on my hearing. The zone always talks to you, sometimes in a whisper, sometimes through the crackle of a dosimeter. But that evening, it decided to scream. My radio, which had been hanging on my tactical vest in absolute silence, suddenly erupted with a loud, aggressive burst of static. In the dead, cotton-like silence of the swamps, that crackle sounded like a cannon shot. I almost dropped my weapon from the shock. My fingers, already stiff from the freezing cold that this fog brought with it, clumsily slid over the plastic casing. I hooked my fingers around the volume dial, desperately trying to twist it down to the minimum, to turn it off, to choke that sound at any cost. My heart was pounding so hard that I could clearly hear its pulsation in my own ears. It felt like every beat of my heart was echoing in this white milk, acting as a beacon for whatever was hiding inside it. And right then, the silence broke completely. It started from the direction where my PDA had shown the markers of those 3 veteran stalkers just a few minutes ago. At first, it was just confused, fog-muffled shouts. They were calling out loudly to each other. I could make out the low, raspy bass of one of them. He was swearing filthily, demanding his partner tell him where the safe path marker had gone. Another voice, a bit higher and already noticeably nervous, replied that the compass had completely lost its mind, the needle spinning in circles like a rabid dog. They didn't understand what was happening. They thought it was just another sudden anomaly in the weather, a regular gas emission from the swamps. They didn't know they were already dead. And then came the scream. My God, that scream. I will hear it at night until the very day the zone claims me for good. It wasn't the sound of a man taking a stray bullet to the chest. When you get shot, you yell differently. It's a sharp, short bark of shock or a hollow, suppressed groan. It wasn't the cry of a rookie who carelessly stepped into a gravitational meat catcher, either. No. It was the raw, soul-tearing shriek of a human being ripped to pieces alive while still fully conscious. It was a primal, choking wail, so full of absolute, inhuman pain and terror that my own vocal cords involuntarily tightened in a painful spasm. Through that dense white haze, I clearly heard the wet, sickening sound of tactical gear being torn apart. The ripping of heavy Kevlar. The moist, dull crunch of thick bones snapping under impossible pressure. And the squelching, an incredibly loud, rhythmic squelching of black swamp mud as something massive forcefully dragged human flesh into it. After that, absolute hell broke loose. A frantic, deafening roar of automatic weapons erupted. The 2 who were still alive opened fire to kill. They just held down their triggers and sprayed lead all around them. I heard the heavy bullets whistling and slicing through the thick air, thudding viciously into the trees somewhere right above my head, severing branches. They were shooting completely blind, frantically emptying their magazines at shadows they couldn't even see. The muzzle flashes momentarily tore through the white void with pale, stroboscopic glares, but even that bright light couldn't pierce the dense mist. It only made the fog look like a boiling, sickly sea. Through the chaotic, relentless crackle of the automatic bursts, one of them suddenly screamed. His voice was breaking into a hysterical, high-pitched falsetto. It was a cry of pure, primal terror, the kind that happens when the mind simply refuses to process reality. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, "It's under us. It's in the mud. Shoot at your feet, shoot at your feet." I heard the ringing clatter of empty brass casings raining down on the wet soil. I heard someone frantically trying to reload their weapon, the metallic clank of a magazine failing to slide into the rifle's magwell because of shaking hands. And then, the shooting just stopped. Cut off mid-burst. Suddenly and permanently. There were no more screams. No more gunshots. No more swearing or praying. Just a heavy, nauseating sound of monotonous dragging. Like a massive, soaking wet canvas sack, stuffed to the brim with raw meat, being pulled slowly and with incredible effort through the swamp water and thick reeds. Slap. Rustle. The slosh of water. Slap. Rustle. I held my breath. I didn't breathe for so long that my lungs started burning with living fire, begging for even a sip of oxygen. Deep in the back of my throat, there was a distinct taste of copper, the taste of my own blood from the sheer tension. Above me, in this blinding white void, massive dark shapes began to drift slowly. I couldn't make out the body of this creature. I only saw the blurred, gigantic outlines of something formless and long, incredibly thin limbs that pierced the mud around me silently, like surgical needles. They moved with the grace of a spider, but their sheer size was absolutely colossal. I didn't dare move a single muscle. I was even afraid to blink. I just stood there, pressed tightly against the dead tree, my knuckles turning white as I gripped my completely useless weapon, and I listened. I listened as this monstrosity dragged its torn prey away into the impenetrable fog. And I understood one terrifying thing perfectly, crystal clear: I am locked in this white hell with it. It hasn't left for good. And as soon as it finishes with them, it will absolutely come back. Part 3. The Point of No Return. I don't know how long I stood glued to that rotting tree. In the zone, time doesn't flow in a straight line, especially when you are just waiting to die. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been an hour. My muscles began to cramp violently from the unnatural tension. My calves were burning with lactic acid, and my fingers, locked in a death grip around my useless rifle, had gone completely numb. I couldn't even feel the trigger guard anymore. Not that a rifle would do any good against something that just chewed through 3 heavily armed veterans like they were made of wet paper. The sickening dragging sound eventually faded away, melting deep into the dense white milk. But the silence that followed was somehow worse. It was heavy, expectant. It felt like the fog itself was holding its breath, listening for the slightest rustle of a jacket, the quietest heartbeat. The temperature just kept dropping. The damp cold chewed right through my tactical gear, seeping straight into my marrow. My teeth desperately wanted to chatter, and I had to bite down so hard on my own lower lip that I tasted fresh, warm blood. Panic is a slow poison. It starts in your stomach, cold and heavy, and then it slowly creeps up your spine until it infects your brain. Logic tells you to stay completely still, to become part of the dead scenery. But the primal, animal part of your brain is screaming at you to run, to move, to get as far away from the slaughterhouse as your legs can carry you. And eventually, the animal always wins. I convinced myself that the creature had dragged its prey far enough away. I convinced myself that if I just took a few slow, silent steps backward, I could slip away into the mist and find higher, safer ground. It was a stupid, fatal rationalization. But I was terrified, and terror makes you stupid. I slowly peeled my back away from the damp bark. The wet fabric of my jacket made a sickeningly loud peeling sound against the wood, like a thick medical plaster being ripped off bare skin. I froze again, my eyes wide, staring into the blinding white void. Nothing moved. The fog just swirled around my knees like dry ice. I took my first step backward. My boot sank softly into the spongy, waterlogged moss. No sound. Okay. Good. I took a second step. My breathing was so incredibly shallow I was practically suffocating myself. But here is the terrifying thing about thick fog. It completely destroys your inner ear. It strips away your sense of balance. Without a horizon line, without any visual anchor to lock onto, vertigo hits you like a physical sledgehammer. My compass was still spinning wildly, utterly useless. I had no idea which way was north, south, or the path back to the pumping station. I was just stepping blindly into a white abyss. On my third step, the ground simply wasn't there. My heel hit nothing but empty air. The sudden weightlessness sent a jolt of pure electricity through my nervous system. I frantically flailed my arms, trying to grab the dead tree, but my fingers only caught a handful of rotting bark that crumbled instantly in my grip. My center of gravity shifted violently, and I fell backward into the milk. I tumbled down a steep, muddy embankment. My shoulder slammed hard against a buried rock, sending a blinding flash of pain shooting up my neck. I couldn't stop myself. I slid through wet clay and tangled, slimy roots, crashing violently into the bottom of a deep, concealed crater. I plunged waist-deep into freezing, stagnant swamp water. The splash was deafening. In the absolute silence of the mist, it sounded like a fragmentation grenade detonating in a small tiled room. The sheer shock of the icy water punched the air right out of my lungs. I gasped loudly, involuntarily swallowing a mouthful of foul, decaying liquid. My rifle slipped from my numb fingers. I heard it splash heavily into the dark water somewhere near my knees. I frantically groped around in the freezing mud, my bare hands tearing against sharp, rusted metal debris hidden beneath the surface, but the gun was gone. I was completely unarmed, half-drowned, and making more noise than a wounded boar. I stopped thrashing. I froze, my chest heaving, filthy water dripping from my face and eyelashes. And then, I felt it. The water around my waist began to vibrate. It wasn't a ripple from my own panicked movements. It was a deep, rhythmic tremor coming through the ground beneath the pool. Thump, thump, thump. Something had detached itself from the main mass of the fog. It had heard the splash. And it was coming straight for the crater. The air temperature plummeted so fast that my frantic, wet breaths turned into thick clouds of steam. The stench hit me again, that sickening, overwhelming smell of butchered meat and raw, burning ozone. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my throat close up. I looked up, trembling uncontrollably in the freezing water. Above the rim of the crater, the glowing white mist began to darken. A massive, formless shadow was looming over the edge. It blocked out what little ambient light there was. It didn't have a face. It didn't have eyes that I could see. I could only make out the darkest silhouettes against the white backdrop, dozens of flexible, writhing appendages trailing down toward the water. I heard its breathing. It was a wet, wheezing sound, like air being forcefully pushed through crushed, fluid-filled lungs. It was standing right over me. One of those appendages slowly descended into the pit. It was thick, segmented, and slick with some kind of dark, oily moisture. It moved with agonizing slowness, blindly exploring the space like a colossal, blind worm. I pressed myself as hard as I could against the muddy bank of the crater, trying desperately to merge with the dirt. The appendage brushed against the surface of the water, sending freezing ripples lapping against my stomach. And then, it touched me. It dragged lightly across the wet leather of my right boot. It felt like a heavy, freezing cold slab of dead flesh. I closed my eyes tightly. The paralysis of total, absolute despair took over completely. I stopped fighting. I stopped thinking. I just waited for that cold, rotting mass to wrap around my waist, pull me up into the white milk, and tear me in half. I accepted that this was my final second in the zone. Part 4. Pure Instinct. I kept my eyes squeezed shut so tightly that bursts of white light flashed behind my eyelids. The appendage resting on my wet boot felt incredibly heavy, like a waterlogged sandbag wrapped in freezing, rotting leather. It slowly dragged upward, sliding over my ankle, exploring the shape of my leg. The stench of ozone and dead blood was so overpowering I could physically taste it coating the roof of my mouth. My heart stopped beating. My lungs stopped working. I was completely disconnected from my own body, just waiting for the sudden, blinding agony of being torn in half. I was entirely ready to die in that freezing crater. And then, the black water right next to my hip exploded. It wasn't the monster. It was the cat. Isotope must have tumbled into the pit with me when I fell, hiding in the tangled roots just inches away. And whatever that colossal monstrosity towering over us was, it finally broke the animal's mind. The cat didn't hiss. He didn't arch his back to make himself look bigger. He let out a sound I had never, ever heard a living creature make before. It was a high-pitched, vibrating, pathetic shriek of absolute, mind-breaking animal terror. It sounded like a pressure valve failing on a steam pipe. He erupted from the freezing water, a frantic blur of black fur and panic. He scrambled desperately up the steep, slippery slope of the crater, his claws tearing frantically at the wet clay. As he bolted, his back paws kicked a shower of freezing, gritty mud directly into my face. The wet dirt hit my eyes and my mouth. The colossal, formless shadow looming over the edge of the pit suddenly flinched. The heavy appendage on my leg violently jerked away, startled by the sudden, shrieking movement of the cat. That split-second distraction was the trigger. That was the spark that ignited the sheer, raw will to live. The paralysis shattered into a million pieces. The heavy, suffocating spell of terror broke, and a massive dump of pure adrenaline hit my bloodstream like a physical hammer blow to the chest. I didn't think. Thinking gets you killed in the zone. If a creature born and bred in the Red Forest was running in blind, pathetic panic, I had to follow it. I lunged forward. I left my expensive rifle sinking in the black water. I didn't care. I dug my numb, bleeding fingers deep into the freezing mud and jagged roots of the crater bank. I pulled my heavy, waterlogged body upward with a violent strength I didn't even know I possessed. I broke over the edge of the pit, scrambling on my hands and knees for a second before throwing my weight forward and pushing myself up into a dead sprint. I launched myself blindly into the white milk. Through the suffocating, impenetrable fog, I saw a fleeting, dark blur darting low to the ground ahead of me. It was Isotope. I locked my eyes onto that shifting shadow and sprinted after him. I ran like a rabid animal. My heavy boots slammed into the unseen ground, splashing through shallow water and snapping dead branches. I had no compass. I had no landmarks. I was completely surrendering my life to the primal survival instincts of a terrified stray cat. The cat was moving erratically. He was zigzagging wildly, darting left, then sharply right. He wasn't running in a straight line, because a straight line in the blind zone is a guaranteed death sentence. I stepped exactly where he stepped, guided only by the frantic splashing of his paws and the shifting of his dark silhouette. Suddenly, the black blur banked violently to the right, almost doubling back on itself. I didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. I threw my entire body weight to the right, my left boot skidding dangerously on wet, slick grass. A split second later, a deafening, metallic screech ripped through the air exactly where I had just been about to step. A gravitational anomaly. A meat catcher. It roared to life, violently twisting the air and shredding a fallen tree trunk into a million wooden splinters. The concussive shockwave hit me hard in the left shoulder, shoving me forward, but I didn't fall. The fog had hidden the anomaly completely. If I had taken one more step straight ahead, I would have been twisted into a knot of broken bones. The cat saw a safe path where absolutely none existed for a human. He could feel the pressure changes. He could smell the chemical burns. We kept running. A millimeter to my left, a hidden chemical puddle hissed and spat boiling green acid, burning holes right through the fabric of my tactical pants. But we slipped right through the invisible maze. Behind us, the swamp erupted. The monster realized its prey was running. I heard a wet, guttural, vibrating roar that shook the damp air and rattled right through my ribcage. Then came the thuds. Massive, heavy, sickening impacts slamming into the mud behind me. It was chasing us. And it was fast. The ground beneath my feet trembled with every colossal step it took. I ran until my lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. Every breath was a agonizing stab in my chest. I ran until the muscles in my thighs screamed, until I couldn't feel the freezing water in my boots anymore. I threw my arms out in front of my face, blindly crashing through dry reeds and thorny bushes that ripped the skin right off my cheeks. I didn't care. I just kept my eyes locked on that little black shadow cutting through the blinding white mist, praying to God that my legs wouldn't give out before we found solid concrete. Part 5. Claustrophobia. 2 minutes. It was only 2 minutes of blind, desperate sprinting through that white hell, but it felt like I had been running for an eternity. My lungs were completely ruined. Every single inhalation felt like inhaling broken glass and battery acid. I could hear the massive, wet thuds of that monstrosity tearing through the swamp right behind me, easily snapping thick trees like dry twigs. It was gaining on us. The ground was shaking so violently that I almost lost my footing twice. The stench of rotting meat and ozone was so thick it was literally gagging me as I ran. I was entirely convinced that at any second, one of those freezing, leathery appendages was going to wrap around my throat and pull me backward into the dark. And then, the frantic black blur of the cat suddenly vanished into the fog right in front of my boots. A fraction of a second later, I slammed shoulder first into something incredibly hard, cold, and solid. Metal. I hit it with so much momentum that I genuinely thought I had snapped my collarbone. I bounced off the rusted surface and crashed hard onto a concrete slab, scraping the skin right off my palms. I gasped, frantically looking up through the blinding white milk. It was the heavy steel door of my emergency drop box. We had actually made it. The cat had led me straight to the only piece of solid shelter for miles. I scrambled to my feet, my boots slipping wildly on the wet concrete pad. I grabbed the massive, rusted iron handle of the door with both hands and threw my entire remaining body weight backward. The heavy hinges shrieked in protest, grinding against years of accumulated rust and dirt. The door slowly groaned open, revealing a pitch-black, suffocating square of darkness. Isotope didn't even hesitate. The cat shot inside like a bullet fired from a gun, diving straight into the absolute blackness of the bunker. I threw myself in right behind him. I collapsed onto the rough concrete floor, my knees slamming hard against the ground, and I instantly kicked backward at the heavy steel door with both of my heavy tactical boots. The door slammed shut with a deafening, metallic boom that echoed painfully inside the tight concrete walls. I scrambled up onto my knees in the pitch black, my hands desperately feeling around the cold steel for the locking mechanism. I found the massive iron deadbolt, wrapped my bloody, shaking fingers around it, and shoved it home into its reinforced steel socket. Clang! I threw that bolt just a fraction of a second before something absolutely massive and incredibly heavy slammed into the outside of the door. The impact was so violently powerful that it physically shook the entire underground bunker. A thick layer of cold dust and loose concrete rained down from the ceiling, completely coating my hair and my wet jacket. I fell backward away from the door, scrambling away on my hands and feet until my back hit the far concrete wall of the small room. I pulled my knees tightly up to my chest in the absolute darkness, shaking so violently that I could hear my tactical vest rattling against the floor. A low, vibrating, guttural howl echoed through the thick steel door, making my teeth ache in my skull. It sounded furious. It sounded hungry. I heard wet, heavy flesh slowly sliding against the outside of the metal, searching blindly for a handle, a gap, a weak spot. I just sat there on the freezing floor, gasping for air, staring blindly into the pitch black of the room. I was completely trapped. It is a terrifying realization when the adrenaline finally begins to drain out of your bloodstream, leaving nothing behind but exhaustion and pure claustrophobia. The air inside the drop box was already stale, smelling heavily of old moisture, rust, and my own cold sweat. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to find the switch on my tactical vest. I finally clicked on my emergency red light. The dim crimson glow slowly filled the tiny, claustrophobic concrete box. I looked around frantically. Isotope was huddled in the absolute furthest corner of the room, jammed tightly underneath my rusted metal cot. The cat was frantically licking the toxic, freezing mud off his torn fur, and he was still violently shivering. I looked into his wide, terrified yellow eyes, reflecting the red emergency light. He is not some magical guardian spirit sent by the zone to protect me. He is not a hero. He is just a frightened, miserable child of the zone who desperately wants to live to see another morning. He ran because he was terrified. But because I abandoned my human logic, because I surrendered my pride and blindly trusted his raw, animal instincts, I survived tonight too. I followed a rat fleeing a sinking ship, and it led me to an island. I crawled slowly across the concrete floor, every muscle in my body screaming in agony, and dragged myself up to the radio transmitter sitting on the old wooden crate. I wrapped my bleeding fingers in torn medical tape just to get a grip on the microphone. I turned the dial, found the emergency stalker frequency, and pressed the button. And that brings us to right now. I am going to stay in this concrete hole until the air filters run completely dry if I have to. I will not open that door until the sun is high and the dosimeters are singing a normal tune. If you are out there in the zone, listening to my voice right now, do not try to be a hero. Do not trust your own eyes when the fog rolls in. Trust the animals. If they run, you run. Find concrete. Seal the heavy doors. And whatever you do, wait out the mist. This is Tina, broadcasting from the swamp Dropbox. Signing off.